I never thought the biggest battle I'd face after purchasing my dream house would involve a tree. And not just some ordinary tree. It was a massive oak that had stood in my front yard for more years than anyone in the neighborhood could remember. When the HOA ordered me to cut it down within 14 days or face thousands of dollars in fines, they were absolutely certain I had no choice but to obey. What they didn't realize was that the city had a very different opinion about that tree. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching HOA Revenge Stories from. Drop your country down in the comments. I always enjoy seeing just how far these stories travel. And if you haven't subscribed to HOA Revenge Stories yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get much crazier. When I first bought the house, the first thing people pointed out wasn't the beautiful kitchen, the spacious garage, or even the peaceful neighborhood. It was the enormous oak tree standing directly in the front yard. Its huge branches extended across so much of the property that they provided shade over nearly half the yard during the hottest summer afternoons. Every spring, birds built nests among the branches. Squirrels constantly darted from limb to limb. Whenever strong winds moved through the neighborhood, the leaves produced a gentle rustling sound that somehow made the entire street feel calmer. The previous homeowner smiled as he handed me the keys and pointed toward the tree. "Take care of the old giant," he told me. "It's been here longer than any of us." I promised him I would. For the first 6 months, everything was practically perfect. The neighbors were welcoming, the community was well maintained, and even the HOA seemed fairly harmless. Every once in a while, they sent reminders about mowing lawns or moving trash cans back after collection day, but nothing seemed unreasonable. Then everything changed one Tuesday afternoon. I opened my mailbox and discovered a certified envelope with the HOA's logo printed across the front. My stomach tightened before I even tore it open. Inside was an official violation notice. According to the board, my oak tree was creating an undesirable appearance because its leaves were falling onto the sidewalk. They also claimed the roots could eventually damage nearby pavement and insisted that several residents had complained because the tree blocked sunlight. Their solution was simple. They ordered me to remove the entire tree within 14 days. If I refused, the HOA threatened to fine me $500 every single week until the tree was gone. I read the letter 3 times because I honestly thought I had misunderstood it. How could they possibly expect me to destroy a tree that had been standing there for more than 100 years? I walked outside and stared up at the enormous canopy. A couple of kids were riding their bicycles beneath it, while 2 cardinals sat quietly on one of the branches. There was nothing dangerous about the tree? Still, I assumed there had to be some kind of mistake. The following morning, I called the HOA office. The manager didn't even allow me to finish explaining before cutting me off. "The board already voted," she said. "The decision is final." I asked her to tell me exactly which rule my tree had violated. She repeated that homeowners were required to maintain their landscaping according to the community's standards. That explanation didn't satisfy me. Something about the entire situation felt rushed. Instead of contacting a tree removal company, I decided to investigate the matter myself. So I called the city's planning department. That one phone call completely changed the situation. The employee asked for my address and placed me on hold for roughly a minute. When she returned, her voice sounded noticeably different. "Sir," she said, "your oak tree is registered as a protected heritage tree." I actually blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She explained that decades earlier, the city had created a registry for trees considered historically or environmentally significant. My oak had been inspected, documented, and officially protected because of its extraordinary age, size, and environmental importance. Removing it without permission from the city wasn't simply discouraged. It was illegal. Even I couldn't legally cut it down just because I wanted to. I asked her to repeat everything because I could barely believe what I was hearing. She gave a small laugh and said, "Your HOA should already know this." That's when it hit me. The HOA hadn't done its homework. I immediately requested copies of every document connected to the tree. By the end of that same day, official records, property maps, and city regulations were sitting in my email inbox. I was confident the problem would finally be over. I sent everything to the HOA and expected them to apologize and withdraw the violation. Several neighbors started whispering whenever I walked by. Some assumed I was simply being difficult. Others believed I couldn't afford the cost of removing such a massive tree. Only a handful seemed to think the HOA might actually be the one making a mistake. Then, one afternoon, while I was watering the flowers, an elderly neighbor quietly walked over to me. "I've lived here for 32 years, she whispered. "That tree has always been protected." I stared at her. If she had known that for decades, how could the HOA board possibly have missed it? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. 1 week later, the city scheduled an official inspection. On a bright Friday morning, a city arborist arrived at my property wearing a reflective vest and carrying a clipboard. He spent almost an hour carefully examining the oak. He measured the massive trunk, inspected the roots, checked the condition of the branches, and compared what he found with the city's old records. Meanwhile, several curious neighbors had gathered across the street to watch. Then, almost as if they had been waiting for the perfect moment, 2 HOA board members showed up. One of them confidently walked toward the arborist with a thick folder tucked underneath his arm. From where I was standing, I couldn't hear every part of their conversation, but I heard enough to understand what was happening. The board member insisted that the HOA had complete authority over landscaping decisions within the community. The arborist calmly stopped him. "No," he said, "not this tree." The board member immediately pushed back. He started arguing that the HOA's rules gave the board control over what homeowners could have in their yards. The arborist didn't raise his voice. Instead, he pointed toward the small metal identification tag attached near the base of the enormous trunk. Then he pulled out the official city documentation. I watched the 2 HOA members look at the papers. Their expressions changed almost instantly. The confidence they had arrived with disappeared. First, they looked confused. Then they looked worried. The arborist explained that ordering a homeowner to remove a protected heritage tree could create serious legal consequences. Any unauthorized attempt to remove the tree could result in substantial penalties. Even worse, encouraging a homeowner to violate city regulations could place the HOA's own actions on an official record. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't nearly as confident as it had been when they arrived. The 2 board members stopped arguing. A few moments later, they quietly walked back toward their car without saying another word. The following Tuesday, the monthly HOA meeting was packed. News about the inspection had spread throughout the neighborhood, and almost every chair in the meeting room was occupied. People wanted explanations. They wanted to know how the board could have threatened someone over a tree that the city had officially protected. When the HOA president finally stood up, the room became completely silent. He cleared his throat and announced that, after reviewing the new information provided by the city, the board had decided to officially withdraw every violation against my property. Every fine was canceled. The order to remove the oak was immediately rescinded. For several seconds, nobody said anything. Then someone sitting toward the back of the room finally asked the question that everyone else had been thinking. If the city already protected this tree, then why did you order him to remove it in the first place? The HOA president hesitated. He gave a vague explanation about incomplete records and an administrative oversight. Nobody in the room looked convinced. By the end of the meeting, several homeowners were openly discussing changes they wanted to make to the way the HOA handled future disputes. People were suddenly questioning how many other decisions had been made without the board properly checking the facts first. As for me, I simply walked home. I passed beneath the same enormous branches that had welcomed me on the day I bought the house. The oak hadn't changed at all. It still provided shade on sunny afternoons. It still gave birds a place to build their nests. It still stood proudly in exactly the same spot where it had stood for generations. But I had changed. I had learned something I wouldn't forget. Just because an HOA sends you an official-looking letter doesn't mean everything written inside it is automatically true. Rules matter, but so do city laws. Property rights matter. And most importantly, facts matter before you allow someone to pressure you into doing something you may not even be legally required to do. Every time I look through my front window and see that old oak moving gently in the breeze, I'm reminded that standing your ground isn't always about winning an argument. Sometimes it's simply about protecting something that is worth keeping.